Good afternoon. It's Sunday, May 21st. Black history, our black history, need not ever be a black mystery. Project Uplift Literacy for a May 21st. I'm going to be talking about two individuals this morning or this afternoon. One, Senator Blanche Bruce, U.S. Senator from the state of Mississippi, and North Carolina A&T student Willie Grimes. I'm going to be talking about May 21st, 1881 and May 21st, 1969. I'm going to be also giving, in his words, my voice, a speech given by Blanche Bruce in the Senate in May 31st, 1876. Blanche Bruce was the first black senator to serve a full term in the U.S. Senate. He was the first black senator to be president of the Senate. And on this date, May 21st, 1881, he was the first black to be featured on the U.S. currency as a Treasury administrator, appointed by, I believe, President Garfield. Willie Grimes was murdered on May 21st, 1969 on the campus of North Carolina A&T, and I'm going to be reading an article by Dr. Karen Hawkins from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Again, this is Project Uplift Literacy for May 21st, 2017. Blanche Bruce, speech in the Senate, May 31st, 1876, on the late election, the election in Mississippi. The conduct of the late election in Mississippi affected not merely the fortunes of bipartisans as the same were necessarily involved in the defeat or success of the respective parties to the contest, but put in question and jeopardy the sacred rights of the citizen in the investigation contemplated in the pending resolution for its object, not its determination of the question whether the offices shall be held in the public affairs of the state be administered by Democrats or Republicans, but the higher and more important end, the protection in all their purity and significance of the political rights of the people and the free institutions of the country. The evidence in hand and accessible will show beyond peradventure that in many parts of the state, corrupt and violent influences were brought to bear upon the registers of voters, thus primarily affecting the character of the voting or poll list, upon the inspectors of the election, prejudicially and unfairly, thereby changing the number of votes cast, and finally, threats and violence were practiced directly upon the masses of voters in such measures and strength as to produce grave apprehensions for their personal safety and as to deter them from the exercise of their political franchises. It would not accord with the laws of nature or history to brand colored people a race of cowards. On more than one historic field, beginning in 1776 and coming down to the centennial year of the Republic, they have attested in blood their courage as well as their love of liberty. I ask senators to believe that no consideration or fear or personal danger has kept us quiet and forbearing under the provocations and wrongs that have sorely tried our souls, but feeling kindly towards our white fellow citizens, appreciating the good purposes and politics for the better classes, and above all, abhorring a war of races, we have determined to wait until such time as an appeal to the good sense and justice of American people could be made. The sober American judgment must obtain in the South as elsewhere in the Republic the only distinction upon which parties can be safely organized and in harmony with our institutions are differences of opinion relative to the principles and policies of government, and that differences of religion, nationality, or race can neither with safety nor property be permitted for a moment to enter into the party contest of the day. The unanimity with which the colored vote acts with a party is not referable to a race prejudice on their part. On the contrary, they invite the political cooperation of their white brethren and vote as a unit because prescribed as such, they deprecate the establishment of the color line by opposition, not only because of the act is unwise and wrong in principle, but because it isolates them from the white men in the South and forces them in sheer self-protection and against their inclination to act seemingly upon the basis of a race prejudice that they neither respect nor entertain. As a class of people, they are free from prejudice, and they have had no uncharitable suspicions against their white fellow citizens, whether native-born or settlers from northern states. They not only recognize the equality of citizenship and the right of every man to hold without prescription any position of honor and trust with which the confidence of the people may elevate him, but owing nothing to race, birth, or surroundings, they, above all classes in the community, are interested into seeing prejudices drop out of both political and business of the country and succeed in life, proceed only upon the integrity and merit of the man who seeks it. But withal, as they progress in intelligence and appreciation of the dignity of their prerogatives as citizens, they, as an evidence of growth, begin to realize the significance of the proverb, "When thou dost well for thyself, men shall praise thee," and are disposed to exact the same protections in concession of rights that are conferred upon other citizens by our Constitution, and that too without the humiliation involved in the enforced abandonment of their political convictions. I have confidence not only in this country and in her institutions, but in the endurance, capacity, and destiny of my people. We will, as the opportunity offers and the ability served, seek our places, sometimes in the field of letters, arts, sciences, in the professions. More frequently, mechanical pursuits will attract and elicit our efforts, but more still of my people will find employment and livelihood as cultivators of the soil. The bulk of this people, by surroundings, habits, adaptation, and choice, will continue to find their homes in the South and constitute the masses of Yomiuri. We will there probably of our own volition and more abundantly in the past produce the great staples that will contribute to the basis of foreign exchange, aid in giving the nation a balance of trade, and minister to the wants and comfort and build up the prosperity of the whole land. Whatever our ultimate position in the composition civilization of the Republic and whatever varying fortunes attend our career, we will not forget our instincts for freedom nor our love of country. Of course, this is the beginning period or ending period of Reconstruction, because after Senator Bruce and another senator from Louisiana left office, there was not another senator elected from in this country until Edward Brooke from Massachusetts, and I believe not another black senator until Walter Scott was nominated by the governor of South Carolina to be the senator currently. Of course, there was a senator elected from Illinois, female senator. Now I'm going to move in the second part of my presentation today to May 21st. 1969. The Greensboro Uprising, with the North Carolina A&T State University and Dudley High School versus the National Guard and armed troops of the state of North Carolina. An armed confrontation began May 21st between students, protesters, police, and North Carolina National Guard on or near the North Carolina State University and Dudley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina. A Dudley student allegedly denied his civil rights. He was not able to become student council president because of his activism. History caused protests at the segregated Dudley High School. Students on the nearby North Carolina campus, North Carolina A&T campus, and because we know that North Carolina A&T in Greensboro was the beginning of the national sit-in movement of the 1960s. So Greensboro, North Carolina A&T has been on the forefront of Black freedom movement in our country. So they protested in support of this Dudley High School student at North Carolina's A&T campus. The protest led to what described as the largest armed assault of the time on an American university. North Carolina's Governor Scott sent over 600 National Guardsmen, personnel carriers, a tank, and a helicopter to the North Carolina A&T campus. The National Guard swept historic Scott Hall using tear gas, smoke, and nausea grenades. During the National Guard assault on North Carolina A&T's campus, student Willie was killed, and hundreds of students were placed in protective custody. A monument stands today in memory of Grimes on the campus in front of the Student Union building on the campus of North Carolina A&T, and I visited that site a number of times when I visited North Carolina A&T. This is a paper that was written by Dr. Karen Hawkins, as she submitted it for her, a thesis. Dudley High School, North Carolina A&T University disturbances, May 1969. In May 1969, while the Nixon administration was seeking to diminish the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War, a separate type of warfare was just heating up in the city of Greensboro, North Carolina. That May, Greensboro witnessed three of the most violent days in its history, as city police, the National Guard, and African-American student protesters came to the foray, leaving several police officers and at least 9 students injured, and one 20-year-old North Carolina A&T sophomore, Willie Grimes, dead. To this day, many Greensboro residents remember the related disturbances at Dudley High School in the North Carolina A&T University as a phase of unnecessary and unjust brutality that largely stemmed from the city's lack of concern for grievances of its African-American citizens. On the morning of May 21st, 1969, between 60 and 75 students from James Dudley High School, an all-black high school located on Lincoln Street, engaged in a picketing demonstration in front of their school's campus. Similar episodes of student protests had been occurring consistently for several months following the results of the student government election held on May the 2nd. In fact, by that point, high school students were receiving protest support from students at the North Carolina A&T University. In addition, dozens of students from both Dudley High and North Carolina A&T had been forcibly arrested by police for violating the North Carolina General Statute, which outlawed disturbing a public school. The source of the protest could be traced to the decision made by the Faculty Student Election Committee to deny the name of African-American junior Claude Burns on the ballot for student body president. Although Burns' then junior class president received 600 write-in votes from his fellow students, his votes were not considered valid by the election committee, and thereby an opponent who received no more than 200 votes was crowned the victor. It was well known within the hallways of Dudley High School that Claude Burns was an advocate of black power. Claude was known to be active in more separatist black organizations, including the Greensboro Association for Poor People, or GAP, which was led by Nelson Johnson, a black student activist at North Carolina A&T. As historian William Chafee explains, both black and white educators saw Claude Barnes as a Johnson puppet, refusing to acknowledge that he might have a legitimate grievance of his own right. Because of this attitude, they also viewed actions by Johnson as a plot to foment rebellion. As Greensboro pastor Cecil Bishop explained, the controversy over Barnes' election simply became the spark that set off the big fire. Students were already angered that Dudley was the only school in the city that restricted dress, hairstyles, and off-campus lunch. Barnes and others were also frustrated by the absence of black culture in the curriculum. But more importantly, many of the African American students who joined in the May 1969 protests felt as if there was no true outlet for them to discuss and negotiate these and other grievances with officials at Dudley or in the community as a whole. In fact, the protesters never received an adequate explanation as to why Barnes' name was denied a spot on the ballot. So on multiple occasions, Principal Brown and fellow Dudley administrators either were unwilling or unsuccessful in utilizing the avenues of communication and resolution set before them. Dudley students and parents, the community forum, A&T students, the Chamber of Commerce Community Unity Division, and the Greensboro Human Relations Commission each made suggestions and pleas to help solve the crisis at Dudley High School, but were generally ignored. The plight of these groups brought to the forefront the plight of African Americans in the city of Greensboro at large, as blacks had possessed a minimal voice in the affairs of their city for generations. The somewhat insensitive responses of school administrators and the police to the protest, and the fact that Owen Lewis, a white administrator in the school system, was put in control of the Dudley situation beginning on May 9th over the African American Principal Brown, seemed only to compound growing frustrations within the black community, especially among a more impatient youth. Thus, the students were left to create situations that would force the officials to take notice. By the afternoon of May 21st, a group of student protesters had grown to over 125, carrying signs that read, "Educate, not dictate, and return our president from exile." Worrying that the protests might spiral out of control, Dudley Principal Franklin Brown called in the assistance of both local police and school officials, who proceeded to persuade student demonstrators to peacefully leave the Dudley campus. But soon after the police left the school grounds, several of the young protesters returned and began throwing stones at the school, smashing windows and destroying school property. Greensboro police, city police, were immediately called back in, and Principal Brown canceled school for the rest of the day. To evacuate reluctant student demonstrators from campus, police emitted a heavy fog of tear gas in the direction of close to 200 students. Residents who witnessed the scene reported that the police actually pursued the group for at least 2 blocks across Lee and up Lincoln Street. Tear gas was being employed the entire distance, they said. Out of the frustration and anger, many students fought back by throwing rocks and bricks at police. The student retaliation continued throughout the afternoon as multiple cars and innocent bystanders were stoned in the Dudley High area. North Carolina A&T students also joined in by throwing rocks at white motorists near the university. A photographer, a truck driver, and 2 law enforcement agents were seriously wounded in the process. At least 5 students were also treated at Moses Cone Hospital for minor injuries ranging from a cut hand to illness from overexposure to tear gas. Members of the African American community, including John Marshall Stevenson, editor of the local Carolina Peacemaker, were particularly upset at the police tactic of liberally spewing tear gas, which had the unintended effect of hitting innocent students who were simply trying to leave the campus peacefully. A cloud of gas also seeped in and around the homes of many African Americans who lived nearby. A concerned mayor, Jack Elam, called on North Carolina Robert Scott to prevent any further disturbances in Greensboro, North Carolina. Governor Scott proceeded to send in 150 National Guardsmen to patrol the city for the remainder of the day. In a news conference held that night, Mayor Elam informed Greensboro residents that the city government was determined to restore peace. We will use whatever is necessary to accomplish this. By that evening, Greensboro police had barricaded the streets near North Carolina A&T University. Superior Court Judge Robert B. Gamble issued a temporary restraining order that forbid interference with Greensboro City Schools, naming 40 people who contributed to the disturbances at Dudley High School. Claude Barnes, Nelson Johnson, and Durham black activist Howard Fuller were 3 of the names included on the list. Despite the efforts of Mayor Elam and Judge Gamble to solicit peace in Greensboro, reports continued to come in the night of May 21st, citing black youths near A&T stoning cars that carried white passengers. In 2 instances, African-American protesters drug white motorists from their trucks, beat them, and lit their trucks on fire. Reports also cited sporadic fire and property damage near the campus. At approximately 10:45, soon after the National Guard were alerted, shots of gunfire rang out from A&T University. By 12:30 that morning on Thursday, as advised by the mayor, law enforcement began returning gunfire directed at them. Accordingly, police fired back against snipers in Scott Hall, an A&T men's dormitory and surrounding streets. Amid the exchange of gunfire between police and A&T students, A&T sophomore Willie Grimes was shot in the back of his head and pronounced dead when he arrived to Moses Cone Hospital. Whether he was shot by law enforcement or a sniper on campus still remains unknown. Sadly, Willie Grimes appeared to be mistakenly hit, as he was not considered to be either a militant or an activist. As one of his instructors stated, Willie Grimes was here for education. I think he was trying to get home when he was shot. Sniper fire and vandalism in downtown persisted until dawn. At the break of daylight, 3 police officers and 1 student had been shot. During the latter hours of May 21st, Mayor Elam declared a state of emergency in Greensboro. He called in an additional 500 National Guardsmen and issued a curfew that night from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m. A&T President Dr. Lewis Dowdy closed the university that same afternoon in the interest of the safety of our students and members of the university committee. Both the Greensboro Human Relations Committee and the Greensboro Youth Council called on residents and students to help return calm to the city. Yet violence crept unremittingly into Thursday evening and early Friday morning as firing between police and snipers resurfaced on A&T's campus. Without consulting A&T officials, the National Guard assembled and prepared to forcefully enter Scott Hall. At 7 a.m., they arrived in armored personnel carriers and began to sweep Scott Hall, where many innocent students were sleeping. Before they rushed into each of the rooms, many of the guardsmen shot off the doorknobs, and almost $57,000 in damage to the dorm from the sweep was reported. Students were placed in protective custody and were released to university officials later that afternoon once the campus was deemed safe. Mayor Elam lifted Greensboro's curfew the next day, May 24th, and correspondingly, most of the National Guard departed from the city. On Sunday, May 25th, Greensboro officials proudly proclaimed that the three-day uprising was over, and Police Colonel A.J. Birch asserted that everything is back to normal. However, it could be argued that while violence had dissipated, the source of the disturbances at Dudley High and A&T University were not fully addressed and therefore still lingered. On October 3rd and 4th, the 1969 the North Carolina State Advisory Committee to the United States Commission on Civil Rights held an open meeting in Greensboro to evaluate the incident and to offer recommendations to deal with the immediate problems in education, law enforcement, and community action. It is a sad commentary, the committee concluded, that the only group in the committee who would take the Dudley students seriously were the students at North Carolina A&T State University. Many whites, on the other hand, tended to blame the influence of outsiders for the demonstration and violent uprisings, rather than to recognize that there were legitimate concerns among the Dudley High School protesters. Governor Scott, who supplied 600 National Guardsmen to Greensboro between May 21st and May 23rd, similarly maintained the initial violence had been created by hardcore militants who used a frivolous issue, that of a school election, to seek out and define confrontation. Undoubtedly, the events of Dudley High and A&T University in May 1969 cannot be accurately explained or understood outside the context of Black Power, which was a growing force among African American youths in communities across the nation, including Greensboro, North Carolina. Arguably, like never before, Black Power emboldened African American students to initiate protests, both violent and nonviolent, on their own account. The rise of the Black Power movement also helps to explain the reaction of many whites who, equally surprised and fearful of this type of boldness, were less willing to negotiate with those they considered irrational or overly rebellious. Not all who protested at Dudley and A&T or supported their cause were advocates of Black Power. It could be said that a good proportion of African Americans in Greensboro, both young and old, simply felt helpless and marginalized in the face of white authority or whiteness or white superiority. Blacks from various age groups, classes, and beliefs came to view the counterinsurgency led by the police and the National Guard to halt the school disturbances as a continuing form of white repression rather than an attempt to address the sources of problems or bring about racial justice to Greensboro. Although the African American protests were not immediately successful in gaining any greater say in local affairs, their subversive actions did at least highlight underlying issues in the black community and in the city as a whole that were worthy of being addressed, not only for the well-being of black citizens, but also for the well-being of the entire Greensboro, North Carolina community. That was in the words of Karen Hawkins and in my voice about the May 21st disturbances at North Carolina A&T and Dudley High School in Greensboro, North Carolina, which led to the killing of Willie Grimes, a 20-year-old North Carolina A&T sophomore. And also we spoke earlier about, in his words, the speech that Blanche K. Bruce gave about the elections in Mississippi and the eventual loss due to the ending of Reconstruction, the rights of actual blacks to vote in the state of Mississippi. Have a great day. Have a great Sunday.